Across much of Scotland this afternoon, some of the showers may be heavy, but many places will avoid these. Temperatures reaching around 18 Celsius. Largely dry across Northern Ireland. A few showers are possible, most likely in the east. Feeling pleasant in the sunshine, with highs reaching 18 Celsius. Breezy along some northern coasts. So showers will fade away for many as we move through to the evening, staying breezy and unsettled, though, across northern Scotland. And that's how the weather is shaping up.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hiya and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. Today we're discussing the latest Pincher allegations in Westminster, why Michael Vaughan has been forced to leave the BBC, and I'll be interviewing Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP, calling for a rethink of sex education in schools. But first, folks, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's just after 2 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. Several new allegations of inappropriate behaviour have been made against former Conservative MP Chris Pincher. 6 claims have emerged just days after he resigned as Deputy Whip and was suspended from the party after allegedly groping 2 men. The latest allegations, which stretch back more than a decade, were reported in several newspapers this morning, claiming he made unwanted advances to male MPs. No official complaints were ever made, and he's denied the allegations to newspapers. Mr Pincher says he's currently seeking professional medical support, but insists he will remain as an MP. The British Medical Association is criticising government plans to halt sick pay for NHS workers who test positive for COVID. The decision, which comes into effect on July 7th, means staff can no longer take special leave to self-isolate. The BMA is warning the move will mean many will be working despite being symptomatic with the virus. The Department of Health and Social Care says NHS staff have generous support with up to 6 months full pay and 6 months half pay depending on length of service. The government's spending watchdog plans to investigate the Prime Minister's 2019 election pledge to build 40 new hospitals by the end of the decade. It's after the Shadow Health Secretary warned the plans are a waste of taxpayers' money, with many hospitals having alterations or refurbishments instead of being new. Wes Streeting has also criticised delays, with NHS trusts still waiting for funds to be allocated. Russia claims it's taken control of a key city in the east of Ukraine. Russia's defence ministry says they now control all of the Luhansk region after capturing the last major city, Lysychansk. Ukraine hasn't yet responded to the claims. It comes as Moscow says at least 3 people have been killed and 4 injured in the Russian city of Belgorod near the Ukraine border. However, this has also not yet been independently verified. Meanwhile, President Zelensky says Russia's attack continues to focus on the Donbass region.
There is a sense of relaxation in many rear cities now, but the war is not over. It is there. Unfortunately, its brutality sometimes only grows, and we must not forget about it. Brutal hostilities continue along the entire front line, in Donbass, the epicenter, of course, in the cities of Luhansk region. Hostile activity is intensifying in the Kharkiv region.
Thousands of Australians have been ordered to evacuate parts of Sydney after torrential rain brought intense flooding. Vehicles have been left marooned and sports fields turned into lakes, with the Met Office warning the downpour will intensify over the next 2 days. Steph Cook, Minister for Emergency Services and Resilience, is warning the public not to be complacent.
The Hawkesbury and Nepean rivers will rise higher than what we experienced in March 2021, March 2022 and April of 2022. If you were safe in 2021, do not assume you will be safe tonight. This is a rapidly evolving situation and we could very well see areas impacted that have never experienced flooding before.
British theatre director Peter Brook has died aged 97. His productions ranged from Lord of the Flies to epic Hindu poem the Mahabharata. He often shunned traditional theatrical buildings for empty spaces such as deserted factories and quarries. Known for staging shows around the world, in 1970 he moved to Paris and founded the International Centre of Theatre Research. And Wimbledon will have tennis on the middle Sunday of the tournament for the first time in its history. British players Heather Watson and Cameron Norrie will both be in action today, making their debuts in the last 16. The centenary of Centre Court is also being celebrated at the All England Club, with previous winners making an appearance alongside refugees from Ukraine, Syria and Afghanistan. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Hello and welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up over this next hour. Westminster or Pestminster? New allegations against the now disgraced Tory Deputy Whip, and even claims the Prime Minister knew about allegations of sexual conduct long ago, are rallying around Westminster. I'll be talking also to Miriam Cates, a Tory MP and a rising star, frankly, in the Conservative Party, who thinks that new sex education classes are too explicit for children. And folks, why is the new head of BBC Radio Wales a Brexit bashing lefty who supports Welsh independence purportedly? And frankly, are you surprised at home? We'll be bringing you all the latest in a bias row at the publicly funded broadcaster. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts though. Prince Charles, is he fit to be king? Let me know, tweet me at GB News or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online on YouTube and don't forget Facebook. Loads of cracking content on our GB News page. Cheers very much. Now, the Crown in my opinion, is an essential aspect of British life. Her Majesty the Queen, who of course we've all been celebrating a lot over recent times, has been the one constant in a Britain that has changed beyond all recognition since, of course, that coronation in 1952. So I believe in our constitutional monarchy and the magic of that institution. So I don't want you to doubt my sincerity in saying that I am an ally of that most precious institution. But I must tell you, I must be honest with you, in my eyes, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles to you and I, is less crown prince and more clown prince. The Prince's comments on everything from the environment to the government's Rwanda policy are known. He might as well have his own column in the Guardian newspaper and add to the cacophony of voices offering haute couture hot takes from a comfortable home. I struggle to imagine as the years roll by and it becomes more apparent that the government's swivel-eyed dash for net zero leaves Britain without energy security. We're even discussing rationing energy this year, by the way, with the National Grid telling energy companies that it might well impose involuntary restrictions on energy supplies this winter. Can you imagine in that scenario what people of this country would think if their future king had cheered on the policies, the very policies that have left us both colder and poorer? That's what I really struggle with. Can you imagine Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, making such decisions or facing investigation by the Charity Commission? The Prince is in hot water thanks to a slew of Sunday Times revelations. He reportedly accepted a suitcase containing €1 million in cash from a controversial Qatari politician. €1 million allegedly stuffed into carrier bags from Fortnum & Mason, the opulent department store with a royal charter to provide the Prince's groceries and tea. Each payment was reportedly deposited into the Prince of Wales' charitable fund accounts, and the paper says bankrolled some of his many struggling projects. Now, there's no suggestion that the payments were illegal, but there are legitimate questions about the judgment of the Prince. And in my view, this shows utter carelessness and, dare I say, even arrogance. And there are separate questions over a cash-for-access culture at Clarence House, with the Metropolitan Police and the Charity Commission investigating fundraising practices that go on at the palace, including the alleged sale of honours, giving you a gong to make a quick buck. And today, the Sunday Times now reports that Charles gave an honour to a controversial Tory peer who spent £1.7 million bailing out one of his failed eco-villages in a string of secretive deals being investigated by that charity watchdog. And again, no suggestion that this is illegal. But is it a good look? And I say all of this as a natural, fervent supporter of both the Prince of Wales and the monarchy. But these stories and claims suggest a political naivety from the Prince that risks harming this most precious organisation. It's irritating enough to me, and I know it's irritating to many of you, when celebrities with more gold than Midas tell us about minding our CO2 emissions and carbon footprint whilst zooming around the globe in private jets spewing out more emissions each year than most of us will ever see in our entire lives. Never mind the future head of state. So I beg you, Charles, in my plea to the royal thee, don't become a meddling Meghan Markle, making decisions that have her all at home doubt your self-awareness, or political pronouncements that make us doubt just how touch you are with the struggling of ordinary people. Now, folks, in other allegations, serious ones made this morning, Boris Johnson has denied claims he ignored warnings about alleged sexual misconduct by his former Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, after a string of further claims about the MP emerged overnight. Dominic Cummings, the former number 10 Chief of Staff, even claimed Johnson jokingly referred to him as Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. Allegations are just that, of course, and everyone is innocent until proven guilty. We strongly believe that on this channel. But could this latest scandal fatally wound an already politically weakened Prime Minister? Well, joining me to discuss this is the journalist at politics.co.uk, Georgia Gilliland, and former Brexit Party MEP, Belinda de Lucy, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Georgia, can I start with you, please? As someone who has their ear to the ground, what's the latest with these allegations made about Boris? What is it suggested that Boris knew before Chris Pincher was given the position?
I mean, I'm sure all of us saw Theresa Coffey quite squirming on Sophie Ridge this morning, essentially refusing to say anything but that there was no specific allegations or sort of settled allegations that Johnson was aware of before reappointing Chris Pincher as Deputy Chief Whip in February, and this has been sort of on all the front pages this morning. This is a terrible look for the government. I think, frankly, the public is losing count of all the self-inflicted scandals, many of them, unfortunately, sex-related, that this government has overseen. I mean, we currently have an unnamed, of course, Tory MP who's been arrested on rape charges and has not been near the Commons since his arrest. This is just another sort of look that the public are getting at this very toxic Westminster culture, which I'm sure many of us have even seen sometimes with our own eyes.
Peter, is this not a case of it just being a plague on all your houses, essentially, within the House of Commons? Is there not a real systemic problem at the very heart and the culture of Westminster?
Well, there's certainly a drinking problem, and I say that having worked in Commons, but I don't at all think it's a plague on all your houses. And let me take two different examples that go to leadership. When Keir Starmer, we all know Labour's had a lot of problems politically. When Keir Starmer was elected leader, Labour had a different problem, relations with the Jewish community. He apologised on day one and committed himself to renewing relations. Yet when you look at the leadership of the Conservative Party, there are problems and scandals of a different nature, primarily sexual and some about outside business interests. And Boris Johnson has deflected and diffused and delayed. And that means you have a miasma of scandal over the Conservative Party, but you also have a Prime Minister putting his narrow political interest above the national interest. It's terrible for politics, it's terrible for government. But of course, it's actually bad for us because there's all these other things going on, cost of living crisis, we need investment infrastructure, and the tragedy in Ukraine, exactly a time when you want the Prime Minister focused on looking after us all and building alliance globally.
Belinda, you've been around politics in your career. Do you think that there is a real problem at the very heart of our democracy, frankly, as far as sexual harassment and assault, as even the allegation is concerned?
Well, I do think it is cross-party. I also think it's cross-parliament. Of course, I've experienced what it's been like at the EU Parliament, which has been described by many a female MEP as a hotbed of sexual harassment, sex parties, drugs, you name it. I think the heady, toxic mixture of narcissism, of power, of opportunity, also being away from family, I think it is a bad mix, but sex scandals is not a new thing. If you think back to the Profumo affair, right up until now.
Oh, we just lost Belinda there. Georgia, can I come to you? Dominic Cummings, right? He has obviously given comment this morning, but should we not take that with a pinch of salt, given that there is no love lost between Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings at this time?
I think it should, of course, be taken with a pinch of salt, as should, frankly, all political commentary. However, it's not just Dominic Cummings who is making these sort of claims. And we do know, of course, that Pincher resigned back in 2017 after similar allegations, and that there are, of course, rumours, once again, we're not sure if these are entirely true, that Boris Johnson himself has referred to Chris Pincher as Pincher by name, Pincher by nature in reference to apparently his sort of handsy way of dealing with people, which, I mean, the word handsy being used in these revelations seems to me also kind of a term that's trying to sort of trivialize it, make it seem just like, oh, you know, he can't, you know, handle himself. He can't handle himself around people. You know, that's just his personality. We're going to deal with it because he's a Boris loyalist, which unfortunately is, I think this is a cross-party issue, cross-political, transnational even. But I think that, you know, the issue is this is clearly a big issue in the Conservative Party right now. Who are the party in government with approximately 80-seat majority, not sure exactly how many that's gone down by recently, and could be going down by again, of course, if Chris Pincher, if his constituency faces a by-election, which, you know, could be a possibility.
Absolutely. Belinda, do you think, just bringing you back in, do you think Boris can turn the ship around, or do you think actually this all is really... It's this constant drip, isn't it, of these news stories, which do not paint the party in a very good, positive political light at all. But do you think he can turn it around? Because I don't know about you, but one thing I'm nervous about is that the whole Brexit project isn't finished yet, Belinda.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think the timing of all these sort of recent allegations and the drip and a lot of the mainstream media being heavily biased against Boris, I think it's really, really unfortunate for Boris, but he doesn't help himself either. I think that his voters could put up with a lot of his flaws and sloppiness if he had remained the sort of anti-establishment hero of 2019. But because he hasn't really delivered as much as people were hoping, he cannot afford to keep making these mistakes. And knowing that there was a possible predatory man working for him and allowing him free reign without taking him aside at least and saying, right, Chris, I know there are rumours, there may not be any evidence yet, but just, you know, you've got to stop this behaviour if it's going on. I don't know if that happened or not, and I don't know if Boris was let down by the layers of people around him who should have vetted Chris better on this.
Peter, is it a case of, you know, you're seeing Sir Keir Starmer under investigation by Durham Police, you're seeing all this pressure on the Prime Minister. There's no real alternative for voters, is there?
I disagree completely, and hopefully we'll know the answer on Keir Starmer soon, but I'm quite optimistic. I don't believe that Keir Starmer broke the rules in Durham, and bear in mind he took that gambit of referring himself. But he's a lawyer, so I believe Keir Starmer will come out of that all right. And bear in mind, as of today, he's not been fined, and Boris Johnson, Chancellor, have. But another pundit said this weekend, the fish rots from the head down. And I want to make that broader point. That, to be fair, all prime ministers in my lifetime and before of any political persuasion have been buffeted by personal scandals among their ministers. But the issue is they've been seen to take decisive action, and Boris Johnson has not done that. And I'm really alarmed by this quote attributed to him, but I think he's denied it, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature, because then he's going to have to look voters in the eye and say there are allegations of impropriety, actually allegations of criminality, and he made a joke about it and then promoted the person at the centre of the allegation. So I think this will come back to Boris Johnson because his personal leadership failures become tied to the confirmed or alleged sexual misconduct of his ministers. And there are a lot of Tory ministers now in this bracket, unfortunately.
So, Georgia, do you think the 1922 committee of backbench Conservatives, do you think they will change the rules and that we'll soon see another confidence vote in the Prime Minister? Or is this yet, which a lot of my viewers believe actually, is this yet another attempt to unseat Boris Johnson?
I think it's difficult to see this particular scandal as an attempt to unseat Boris Johnson because it's essentially self-inflicted. Of course, Johnson is not responsible for Chris Pincher's actions, but as we've been discussing, a similar incident happened in 2017. Everyone knows about this, the allegations, and it was judged fit to promote him again. This is self-inflicted in many ways, and I think we have heard many rumours released to top newspapers that the 1922 committee will try and change the rules. I think whether or not they manage to change the rules, because obviously their rules are quite sort of secretive, but experts basically believe that they do have the power to change them, and they can threaten, Prime Ministers as they did with Theresa May with a fresh no confidence vote. I think it's a big possibility. Hard to pinpoint exactly when this will happen. Possibly not this scandal, but let's say there's another by-election. Let's say Johnson's found to have misled the Commons. I think it's difficult to see a situation where he's possibly not threatened with another vote again within 12 months.
Belinda, one question I want to ask you, and this is going to make me sound more woke than, I don't know, the Guardian newspaper, but do you think this would have happened under a female Prime Minister?
Possibly. It's very hard because rumours are very different from having actual evidence, and it hasn't been proven that Boris had actual evidence that this man committed predatory behaviour. It was rumours, and of course he was acquitted in 2017. So I do think it's slightly unfair to just guess that Boris definitely knew. However, I think it's happened under male, female prime ministers. I think, unfortunately, as I said, it's the toxic-heady mix of egos and narcissism and power that make people almost like go on heat. So no, I don't think it's to do with male or female prime ministers.
Right, we're going to have to leave it there, folks, but thank you very much for your time. That was the politics.co.uk journalist Georgia Gillilee, former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy, and the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Thank you to each of you. There's plenty more to come, folks, this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we're going to be discussing Michael Vaughan and why he's left the BBC. Was he forced out by, frankly, a woke kangaroo court of opinion or not? But first, folks, here's a look at the weather. What's going on out there?
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery across northern and eastern parts, but drier further south and west. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and here it'll be a fine end to the day, with the daytime showers having long died out. There'll be plenty of warm evening sunshine too. Meanwhile, in the southeast, there'll still be a few showers as we head through the evening. Some could be on the heavy side as well. Meanwhile, over in Wales, most of the showers will have cleared away. One or two are still possible, but for many it will be dry and often sunny. Some showers are set to linger across parts of northwest England and the West Midlands through until the start of the night. The breeze will be picking up too, especially towards the coast. Over in the northeast, we can expect a few heavy showers to end the day. The odd rumble of thunder cannot be ruled out either, though there should be some evening sunshine here as well. Across Scotland, it will turn increasingly windy as heavy, showery rain feeds in from the northwest. Heavier bursts could bring 5 to 10 millimetres of rain in some places overnight. In Northern Ireland, any sunny breaks will be quite limited, and there'll be a few showers through the evening and overnight as well. It's also going to turn blustery here. Heavy and blustery showery rain will then feed across northern parts overnight, staying drier further south with some clear skies. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, I want to talk to you about the former England captain, Michael Vaughan. That's cricket. He stepped down from his role as a really quite prominent BBC cricket pundit after a diversity group at the corporation labelled his participation at the third test against New Zealand this week as totally inexcusable and embarrassing. Now, Vaughan is being investigated formally by the England and Wales Cricket Board for alleged racist comments during his time playing at Yorkshire, something he strongly and strenuously denies. So is all of this fair to Michael Vaughan? And I'm saying to you today, folks, what happened to innocent until proven guilty? Well, joining me to discuss this and take us through it is my friend, the sports writer at The Sun, Justin Allen. Justin, look, do you agree with me that absolutely nothing has been proven, right? You cannot operate in a vacuum where we say, right, well, you know, people on Twitter are saying that this may well be true. The people at the BBC are saying, well, we cannot have someone on who has been accused of X, Y, and Z. But the fundamental point here is that Michael Vaughan has been accused, right? It's not proven.
No, that's right. He strenuously denied it all along. He says that the mistakes happened during his time as Yorkshire captain that he regrets. However, in terms of the racial allegations, he's totally denied every single word, and that's still to be proven. And like you, I subscribe to the old British values of innocent until proven guilty. This sort of diversity group, which are anonymous, by the way, I think there's a panel of 7 of them, and they're actually anonymous. And they've expressed their disgust that Michael Vaughan is allowed to continue in his role as a commentator of Test Match Special, despite being charged by the ECB. But as things stand, it's a charge, and he will get his day where he will be able to, put his case across. And if he's innocent, then we can move on. But it does strike me as strange that the group in question, none of them actually work with Michael Vaughan. They actually come from the football side of the BBC's operation, so none of them actually work with Michael Vaughan. And no one's been asked at Test Match Special in terms of their team of what their views are on this.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of my viewers are strongly of the view that actually, as far as sport's concerned, it is just going so far down the wackery and wokery rabbit hole that you wouldn't know, would you, that you might well know about Michael Vaughan's allegations, but you wouldn't know that Azim Rafiq was found to have, the one that made the accusations, found to have posted a series of anti-Semitic tweets from years ago, and he hasn't received nearly as much scrutiny or criticism as Michael Vaughan has. Is there a double standard here, where one lot of so-called purported alleged racism isn't okay and you must lose your career and your reputation, and yet one, on the other hand, is A-OK? It's not okay with me, Justin. It's really not.
No, it's complete hypocrisy, to be honest with you. And as I say, he came out with anti-Semite tweets. That they're there, black and white. He's actually apologised for that as well, and we can move on. But yeah, so that's fine in the eyes of a lot of people. I mean, you might remember that there's a lot of this happening now. Going back over old tweets, the England fast bowler Ollie Robinson, you might remember, made some tweets that could be seen as a sort of sexist, rather sexist, which he made when he was a teen. But that doesn't define him sort of 12, 13 years later. I think the thing is with racism and it's not just sport; it's a society thing. What we deemed acceptable 10, 15, 20 years ago, things have progressed, and now the sort of things that used to be said are no longer said. I mean, one of the tweets I think that Michael Vaughan put out about 10 years ago, they made a big deal about, was when he commented about the 118 hotline being full of foreign call handlers and that he couldn't understand what they were saying. Now, you might remember at the time, there was a comedy on TV called Phone Jacker, which used to depict foreign, sort of, I don't know, mobile phone companies from India ringing for customs, and you couldn't understand the word they were saying, but that was sort of seen as banter and comedy at the time, but now it's seen as totally unacceptable.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you cannot basically have had a past, right? That's the lesson we're learning from all of this. You cannot have said anything which might have been in vogue at the time, which is suddenly unacceptable, and you lose your career and livelihood over it. But I'm wondering, do you reckon that the BBC will have him back, or do you think actually they're going to, frankly, make him their test case for where we're going, where we're headed, as far as the future of anyone who's ever said anything is concerned?
Well, I think if he's found guilty by the ECB, I think that could be the end of Michael Vaughan on certainly on the BBC, which obviously would be a great shame because he was a fantastic cricketer, a bit of a hero of mine actually as a cricket captain. Obviously, he won us the Ashes. Everyone remembers that. But no, I think if he's obviously found not guilty, I think that'll make things a lot easier, and we'll see him back on the airwaves. I mean, he's too good a personality and commentator for his career to be completely over, I would have thought.
I just don't know, Justin, how you ever prove allegations like this one. It's tittle-tattle, right? He said, she said. But Justin Allen there, the sports writer at The Sun, thank you very much for your insight. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, we're going to be discussing sex education. Can it be too graphic for kids? I'll be speaking to a Tory MP that certainly thinks so. But here, first of all, is the news headlines with the wonderful Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Just after 2:32, here's the latest. 6 new allegations of inappropriate behaviour have been made against former Conservative MP Chris Pincher. The fresh claims have emerged just days after he resigned as Deputy Whip and was suspended from the party after allegedly groping 2 men. The latest allegations, which stretch back more than a decade, were reported in several newspapers this morning, claiming he made unwanted advances to male MPs. No official complaints were ever made, and he's denied the allegations to newspapers. The British Medical Association is criticising government plans to halt sick pay for NHS workers who test positive for COVID. The decision, which comes into force on July 7th, means staff can no longer take special leave to self-isolate. The Department of Health and Social Care says NHS staff have generous support with up to 6 months full pay and 6 months half pay, depending on the length of their service. Wimbledon will have tennis on the middle Sunday of the tournament for the first time in its history. British players Heather Watson and Cameron Norrie will both be in action, making their debuts in the last 16. The centenary of Centre Court is also being celebrated at the All England Club, with previous winners making an appearance. And British theatre director Peter Brook has died aged 97. His productions ranged from Lord of the Flies to epic Hindu poem, the Mahabharata. He often shunned traditional theatrical buildings for empty spaces, such as deserted factories and quarries. Known for staging shows around the world, in 1970 he moved to Paris and founded the International Centre of Theatre Research. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Darren will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, I want to talk to you about sex, but don't worry, you're not tuned in to Channel 4. The government's 2020 Relationships and Sex Education Guidance has opened the floodgates to extreme content on sex in schools. My next guest has claimed. Miriam Cates is the MP, Conservative MP for Preston and Stocksbridge. She says, actually, now children, and I quote, are being exposed across the country to a plethora of deeply inappropriate, wildly inaccurate, sexually explicit and damaging materials in the name of sex education. Predictably, as happens whenever progressive narratives are challenged, there's been a backlash. But Miriam has stood firm. One person on her side is Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, who said yesterday that people are terrified of pointing out the basic facts of biology in reference to the trans debate. Well, joining me now is Miriam. Miriam, thank you very much for your company. Can you just give us an insight into the kind of inappropriate materials that it is that you're talking about that children are being exposed to in the classroom?
Good afternoon, Darren. Well, I think some of the materials are just unsuitable for your watchers, I'm afraid, and, you know, it would ruin their Sunday lunch. If they want to see the full details of some of the things that are being taught to our children, it's probably best to watch or read my speech in Parliament from Thursday. But, you know, some of the less graphic but equally inaccurate materials might be an example of telling children that they can be divided into two groups: menstruators and non-menstruators. And obviously that's not an extreme example. As I said, I can't really tell you some of those. But it is incredibly misleading. If you think about a teenage girl who's perhaps going through puberty, who doesn't start her periods, how is she supposed to know that there's something wrong, that she should consult a doctor, that perhaps she might be pregnant? Would she not just think, perhaps I'm one of those non-menstruators? And that might seem strange or even funny to adult ears, but we forget how little children know and that they don't know about things unless they're told the truth. And there are just so many examples of materials like these, usually from outside groups. Anyone can set themselves up as a sex education agency. And I could have spoken for 2 hours, at least, with all the materials I received. And since I spoke, I've received more and more emails from people across the country with more and more examples. And I think it's not just how extreme some of these materials are, it's the age of the children that they're being taught to. So teaching young children about sexual pleasure and sexual activities, children who are pre-sexual, pre-pubescent, I think is deeply unsuitable and just ruining the innocence of childhood.
Exactly, I agree with you completely. And were I to have kids, you know, I would be saying, well, I want to pull my kids out of these classes, right? Do you think, Miriam, that parents should have more control and more say over what their children are exposed to in the classroom? Because it strikes me that this activism, this whackery and wokery, has pervaded, frankly, education. And I'm wondering where a Conservative Party, which had an 80-seat majority, is.
Yes, well, that's a very good point. Yes, I do think parents should have more control and more rights. I mean, fundamentally, I think in this country, we have an understanding that bringing up children in terms of their values, in terms of sex and relationships, is primarily the responsibility of family and community, not the state. And I think we're moving towards a time when perhaps the state is considering itself responsible for educating children on values, and that's very dangerous. So yes, parents should have more rights in this, but one of the problems is that they don't know what their children are being taught, because I've heard of numerous examples, and in fact one was reported last weekend, the case of Claire Page, where parents have asked schools to provide them with materials that are being used to their children, and their children have refused, and the schools have refused on the grounds of copyright. That's deeply worrying, and I'm very much hoping the government's going to do something about that. Certainly there's been an amendment brought in the House of Lords to the schools bill that would try and sort that problem out. But if parents don't know what their children are being taught, how do they know what to withdraw their children from? And unfortunately, it's not just the case that this is just about sex education. As you say, some of these ideologies are being pushed throughout the curriculum in history. I've even seen a maths lesson about non-binary that's being used to push gender ideology. So parents obviously can't withdraw their children from maths. The answer has to be that we get this kind of inappropriate and inaccurate material out of schools. And that's ultimately the government's responsibility to make sure that happens.
I mean, Miriam, I doubt many of my viewers aren't of the view that, frankly, if you're wanting to talk to children as young as those that you've just described about these issues around sex and gender, what's going on? Like, why would you even want to talk to a child about these topics?
Well, I think there are genuinely some very well-meaning people out there who believe that preparing children early, before they meet some of these ideas and on the internet, for example, so preparing them by teaching them in the classroom. And I can understand that. We cannot forget about the role of the internet in this. 50% of 14-year-olds have seen pornography on the internet. It is absolutely the case now that children are being exposed to sexual material at a very early age. So I can understand that point of view. But I do think actually it's part of a broader agenda to adultify children, to push on them adult political concerns. So this perhaps started with climate catastrophism. Of course, we should be concerned about climate change. Of course, as adults, we should take responsibility for that. But should we be teaching children that the world's going to end, that it's a catastrophe, that adults are evil? We moved on to critical race theory, and now we're on gender ideology. These are adult political concerns that it's right for adults to talk about, but it's wrong to push them on children and use children as pawns in this political activism. And one example of that is schools that celebrate Diversity Week during Pride Month. Now, it's fantastic that schools teach about tolerance and respect and diversity. That's really positive, and of course we want schools to teach about that. But when we think about what the LGBTQIA+ movement is, it's a movement about adult sexual liberation. And of course, adults should be concerned about those things. But should we be asking children as young as 11 to align themselves with that kind of political activism? Is that right? Is that actually sexualizing children in itself? And these are the kind of questions that I think schools need to step back from, instead of just thinking, this is the kind thing to do, this is the politically correct thing to do. Is this best for children? Is this appropriate for children? Or actually, should we be protecting children from these kind of adult ideologies?
Well, indeed, because it's all well and good, and it sounds very virtuous and laudable, doesn't it, Miriam, to say, well, I'm going to take my child along to a pride parade, but then you find out that someone's wearing whips and chains and goodness only knows what else in a very, what is an obvious sexualised environment. And even, people saying, oh, well, drag queens, it doesn't matter that they teach, they might be doing some form of classroom activity with children. But then you hear the names and the double entendre, even, Miriam, in the names of the drag queen themselves. And you think, well, this is just not age appropriate. Why have we got to this point where the merge between education and entertainment, adult entertainment, I think the boundaries of those two things are merging too close together. We need to strip it back to basics and just teach kids what they need to know to make them robust individuals who can go out into the world of work. You don't need all of these activist pursuits in the classroom.
That's absolutely right. And I think, we could unpack that all day. And the truth is that our children are more physically overprotected than they've ever been. I think actually to their detriment, they're not getting opportunity to play unsupervised, to play outdoors, to make their own mistakes, to take risks in a positive way. They're too coddled. But at the same time, they're having adult ideologies and adult agendas foisted on them at an age when they're just not able to think critically for themselves. And, some people think, the answer to this is just to teach these things in a neutral way. But I'm sorry, if you teach a 6-year-old that they might not actually be a boy, they might not be a girl, how can you teach that in a neutral way? Children are programmed to believe adults. They should believe adults. That's how they learn and grow and become wise and mature. And if we're not telling them the truth, then we're breaking an important part of childhood. And that's what we need to step back from and really reflect. As you said, some of these agendas sound kind and they sound tolerant and well-meaning. But when we step back and think about what we're doing to children, it's not kind and well-meaning at all. And actually, we need to think again about what childhood is, what it's for, and what our role is as adults to protect that incredibly important part of anyone's life.
Well, Miriam, I'm sure I've just cost you your ministerial promotion and your red box, but I really do, and I'm sure my viewers do as well. Thank you very much for all the work and the highlighting that you're doing to really hit home that the government need to, I think, get serious, get a grip of this stuff, this activism within schools for the good of kids. But that was Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stockbridge. Thank you to her for her time. Now, folks, next, the BBC's new Radio Wales editor has a history of Brexit hating and pro-Plaid Cymru tweets. Of course, Plaid Cymru being the Welsh independence movement in Wales. Guido, folks, revealed this week, having views before joining the Beeb, by the way, isn't a crime, but this is a pattern of a, left-leaning bias within the broadcaster, within BBC Wales. And the radio boss, Carolyn Hitt, will work for the director of the BBC, who was once a special advisor to Welsh Labour politician Ellen Jones. The pair even went on holiday together, apparently, in Dublin, where they shared pictures with Leslie Griffiths, who's a Labour member of the Welsh Assembly. Guido also revealed to us. Now, they might be great journalists, but is there an impartiality problem at the top of BBC Wales? Well, one man with a view who joins me now is the political commentator and proud Welshman, Richard Taylor. Richard, mate, cheers for joining me. Do you think there is an inherent bias at the heart of BBC Wales? Do you get the sense that there is a lot of left-leaning, pro-independence, content that's pushed out by them?
Yeah, you certainly would have seen that during the whole Brexit campaign here in Wales, Darren, and we've seen it in our media, our culture, our education, the arts. It seems as if Welsh nationalism has taken a grip of people, and unless you're able to, support independence, you're unlikely to get a job working in Welsh media. Anybody that's centre-right, it's very difficult to get a job. What people in Westminster don't realise, we have a one-party state here in Wales. Since devolution, Welsh Labour have been in power. Now they're propped up by, of course, Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, and their policies are exactly the same. Except to say Plaid Cymru are openly calling for Welsh independence, which would be fiscal suicide for the people of Wales. And Welsh Labour are doing it through the back door, using devolution and calling for more powers. And even more recently, they've changed the way that the voting system works. They've changed the setup of the Senate, or they're wanting to increase it. So they're literally giving themselves the ability to stay in power indefinitely. And the media here in Wales, I can tell you, because I've faced it myself. For example, Carolyn Hitt, you mentioned there, who's now the editor of BBC Radio Wales. She was part of a news publication called Wales Online. Now, Wales Online have blocked me from their publications. They've stopped, having anything to do with me for simply having a view on Brexit and calling them out over their bias. The bias that we see in our media here in Wales is very palpable, and people can see it. Whenever we get local elections, like the last election that we had, more airtime is given to the Welsh nationalists and Labour, because they're both, cheeks of the same butt. I'm going to say that in the afternoon. I just said it, didn't I? They're the same. And literally, this is what we're seeing in Wales. And it's very difficult because outside of Wales, in the London Village, Westminster, they don't really see what's going on here. And, our education, as I've said, is being infiltrated by these Welsh nationalists. For example, yesterday, there was a march with Yes Cymru. They're a pressure group calling for Welsh independence. And there were professors, people who are teaching in our universities that were openly on that march, which they're entitled to do, calling for Welsh independence. And they're educating our children as well, saying that, Westminster is evil and Wales is good. Everything about Westminster is horrible. That's the kind of message they put out to the people here in Wales.
That is your view, and of course the BBC would strongly deny that and say that they're, more balanced than a seesaw. But do you actually think that this appointment suggests that the BBC, in your opinion, has forgotten the B part, the start of that, the British part, right? Is this an organisation, an outfit where you're saying, actually, Richard, there is no scrutiny of the fact that there is a Welsh independence movement within the broadcaster as far as BBC Wales is concerned? Is that what you're alleging?
Yes, I am, indeed. And not only that, Darren, as well, she's not the only one that works for Welsh media. BBC Wales, I know some of the presenters on there, they're friends of mine. I mean, they wouldn't come nowhere near someone like me because I'd be considered as an extreme right-wing nut job, just for having different views. And we've seen it here in Wales continually. Even some of the people in high positions within Welsh media who do have a slant and a bias, of course, because they want Welsh independence. They're even calling in the Senate, that's the Welsh Parliament, for media to be devolved. They want full control of it. And, it's, for me, the BBC is about not being biased, but we've seen it nationally as well. Your viewers will know very well, Darren, and you've covered this a lot as well. The BBC are not impartial. They're biased. We've seen it during the Brexit campaign, where we see it now through, the propaganda that we get on our TV screens. And sadly, it's the same in Wales. But unfortunately for us here in Wales, you look at the publications, I mentioned Wales Online, there's another one called Nhs Cymru. They are funded by the Welsh Government. Large parts of their funding come from the Welsh Government, not so much Wales Online, some of these other groups. And as a result of that, of course, they're going to support the government that's in power, which is Welsh Labour, propped up by Plaid Cymru.
OK, Richard, they're your claims, of course, and I agree with you on one point there. Reforms of the BBC are absolutely necessary. I think the monopoly that they have, the power that they have, isn't fair and isn't right. But that was the political commentator Richard Taylor there, giving his robust remarks. Now, folks, moving on, Oxford University has a new policy demanding staff and students treat each other with respect, courtesy and consideration when communicating online. And a group of Oxford dons are opposed to it. The professors claim that the new rules would stifle free speech and could result in people losing their jobs if someone takes offence, that watchword of the moment, to what they post online. So this begs the question, are universities actually a threat to free speech rather than its custodians? Joining me now is the university student Adam Wildsmith and Steed Bennett. For starters then, Adam, I'll start with you. Have you witnessed a stifling of free speech at your university?
I wouldn't say so much so, but it's completely ridiculous that you could lose your job because you say something or tweet something that this narrow-minded minority disagree with. The whole point of freedom of speech is that in order to speak freely, you have to risk offending. And this idea that this minority, their right not to be offended, trumps everybody else's right to speak freely is completely ridiculous. I remember Newcastle University's student newspaper, they had a whole front page on the whole Rod Little scandal at Durham University, where he was hounded out because the students there decided that they didn't want to hear what he had to say because they'd already decided that he was guilty by the High Court of Wokeness. So he was hounded out. They contacted The Spectator, they contacted the Sunday Times, demanding his dismissal from those publications. And I have to say, if someone like Rod Little's good enough for the Sunday Times, then he's good enough for a bunch of overprivileged idiots at Durham University.
Yes. So, Steed, then, coming to you, would you agree with that? Would you actually say that? And this, I think it's symptomatic of a generation, I was just discussing this with Miriam Cates MP, where we're wrapping students, we're wrapping young people in cotton wool, and we're saying to them, you must be protected. Do you think that President Xi of China is doing that to the next generation? This is just ridiculous, isn't it? This is just wrapping people up, trying to protect them from what I would call the real world. Sometimes people say things you disagree with. That's called life.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with everything that was just said.
What I think we have to be, and I think this is what I think Oxford University has slightly made a bit of a mistake here with, is the idea of respect in university and outside university. You know, we're all humans, we all have lives, and we all have very differing opinions. And the issue is the word respect is subjective. To some people, I'd say you could say many things about Brexit and they'd find that disrespectful. So suddenly we're going to start firing people for their views on Brexit, or we're going to start firing people's views on transgenderism, because loads of people could find that disrespectful. So it's really about understanding, you know, so respect is a very subjective thing, and we've got to understand people outside a classroom need to have, you know, it's freedom of speech. We are allowed to say whatever we want to say. And, you know, if we start stifling that just because of the job, you can't, you know, you're restricting people's lives here. Like, you know, I can't go on Twitter and say a conservative viewpoint just because I have a job somewhere. It's borderline ridiculous.
Adam, very quick last word to you. Do you think that universities are bastions of free speech, or do you think they're now just wrapping people up in cotton wool and actually taping over the mouths of people as well?
Yeah, I think too often at the moment, universities are focusing more on protecting people from being offended by speech than they are about protecting free speech itself.
Perfect way to end that. That was the university students Adam Wildsmith and Steve Bennett before him. You're watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much for your company. But now, folks, we're going to go and see what the weather's up to.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery across northern and eastern parts, but drier further south and west. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and here it'll be a fine end to the day, with the daytime showers having long died out. There'll be plenty of warm evening sunshine too. Meanwhile, in the southeast, there'll still be a few showers as we head through the evening. Some could be on the heavy side as well. Meanwhile, over in Wales, most of the showers will have cleared away. One or two are still possible, but for many it will be dry and often sunny. Some showers are set to linger across parts of northwest England and the West Midlands through until the start of the night. The breeze will be picking up too, especially towards the coast. Over in the northeast, we can expect a few heavy showers to end the day. The odd rumble of thunder cannot be ruled out either, though there should be some evening sunshine here as well. Across Scotland, it will turn increasingly windy as heavy, showery rain feeds in from the northwest. Heavier bursts could bring 5 to 10 millimetres of rain in some places overnight. In Northern Ireland, any sunny breaks will be quite limited, and there'll be a few showers through the evening and overnight as well. It's also going to turn blustery here. Heavy and blustery showery rain will then feed across northern parts overnight, staying drier further south with some clear skies. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, TV and online. Next, we'll be discussing Prince Charles, MPs bringing babies into Parliament, the return of grammar schools potentially, and the scrapping of the Human Rights Act. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's just past 3 o'clock. Here's the latest news. Several new allegations of inappropriate behaviour have been made against former Conservative MP Chris Pincher. 6 claims have emerged just days after he resigned as Deputy Whip and was suspended from the party after allegedly groping 2 men. The latest allegations, which stretch back more than a decade, were reported in several newspapers this morning, claiming he made unwanted advances to male MPs. No official complaints were ever made, and he's denied the allegations to newspapers. Mr Pincher says he's currently seeking professional medical support, but insists he will remain as an MP. The government's spending watchdog plans to investigate the Prime Minister's 2019 election pledge to build 40 new hospitals by the end of the decade. It's after the Shadow Health Secretary warned the plans are a waste of taxpayers' money, with many hospitals having alterations or refurbishments instead of being new. Wes Streeting has also criticised delays, with NHS trusts still waiting for funds to be allocated. The British Medical Association is criticising government plans to halt sick pay for NHS workers who test positive for COVID. The decision, which comes into effect on July 7th, means staff can no longer take special leave to self-isolate. The BMA is warning the move will mean many will be working despite being symptomatic with the virus. The Department of Health and Social Care says NHS staff have generous support with up to 6 months full pay and 6 months half pay, depending on the length of their service. 6 people have reportedly been killed in Ukraine this afternoon after multiple Russian missile attacks. The mayor of Sloviansk claims the attacks were the worst shelling to hit the eastern city, causing multiple fires. It's after Russia claims to have taken control of another key city in the east of Ukraine. Russia's defence ministry says they now control all of the Luhansk region after capturing Lysychansk. Ukraine hasn't yet responded to the claims.
There is a sense of relaxation in many rear cities now, but the war is not over. It is there. Unfortunately, its brutality sometimes only grows, and we must not forget about it. Brutal hostilities continue along the entire front line, in Donbass, the epicentre, of course, in the cities of Luhansk region. Hostile activity is intensifying in the Kharkiv region.
Israel say they will analyse the bullet that killed Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh to determine whether one of its soldiers was responsible. US forensic experts are to oversee the investigation into the ammunition. She was shot in May while covering an Israeli military raid on a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. Eyewitnesses claim she was killed by Israel Defence Forces, something Israel denies. Thousands of Australians have been ordered to evacuate parts of Sydney after torrential rain brought intense flooding. Vehicles have been left marooned and sports fields turned into lakes, with the Met Office warning the downpour will intensify over the next 2 days. Steph Cook, Minister for Emergency Services and Resilience, is warning the public not to be complacent.
The Hawkesbury and Nepean rivers will rise higher than what we experienced in March 2021, March 2022 and April of 2022. If you were safe in 2021, do not assume you will be safe tonight. This is a rapidly evolving situation and we could very well see areas impacted that have never experienced flooding before.
Some sport, and Wimbledon will have tennis on the middle Sunday of the tournament for the first time in its long history. British players Heather Watson and Cameron Norrie are both in action today with their debuts underway. The centenary of Centre Court is also being celebrated at the All England Club, with previous winners making an appearance alongside refugees from Ukraine, Syria and Afghanistan. British theatre director Peter Brook has died aged 97. His productions ranged from Lord of the Flies to epic Hindu poem, the Mahabharata. He often shunned traditional theatrical buildings for empty spaces such as deserted factories and quarries. Known for staging shows around the world, in 1970 he moved to Paris and founded the International Centre of Theatre Research. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to The Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up over this second hour, jam-packed that it is. Prince Charles is in the headlines again. This hour we'll be discussing the fact that he took numerous flights last year to beat the traffic, despite his supposed green credentials. Is our next king a hypocrite? That's what we're asking. And is it time to bring back grammar schools? The government is considering it. I'll be joined by people on both sides of the debate, including a former government minister. And what has the Human Rights Act done for you? Some say it's a gift to lefty lawyers wanting to block the Rwanda migrant plan. Others, among other things, suggest that actually it protects our basic freedoms. I'll be speaking to an expert. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As ever, your gob is more important than mine. What are your thoughts on Prince Charles? Is he fit to be our next king? Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online on YouTube. Don't forget Facebook though. Loads of brilliant content on our GB News page. Cheers very much. Now, a parliamentary cross-party review has recommended that MPs shouldn't be able to bring babies into the House of Commons chamber. The report was ordered by Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle after an outcry over Labour MP, the MP of me, if you ask me, Stella Creasy, saying that she couldn't bring her newborn son into the chamber. So is the effective ban a necessary step toward an important place of work? Or is it a regressive step which will, of course, disadvantage women? Well, with me to discuss this is the political commentator Alice Grant, former Labour MP and Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane, and agony aunt Hilary Freeman. Hello to all of you. Dennis, I'll start with you. I'm assuming, as a former MP, you are, and a Labour Party man, you are firmly with Stella Creasy right now.
And as a father of 4 very, very small children when I became an MP. By the way, Darren, since I was a journalist, I'm a journalist, bit of breaking news just now. I've been out on the street with Labour guys, and the word is they're preparing and thinking that Boris may be going for a December election. So you heard it first on GB News. It's true. You've got the scoop of the autumn. I think I've looked at this report. It's the procedure committee. It's stuff for the very ageing old Tory men who've got a problem with babies. I mean, it's just sad that they're so out of touch.
So, Alice, is that your view as well? Do you think actually this is just a load of stuffy old males in an oak-panelled room in Parliament, maybe, who are just so out of touch with the modern world?
Hi, Darren. Thank you so much for having me on. No, I completely disagree. I'm a young woman. I do hope to have a family in the future, but I can clearly see that babies have no place in Parliament. Parliament is a place where we make laws, not where children come to accompany their mothers to work. Honestly, I think that Stella Creasy, while I admire her very much for wanting to include her newborn in her work, I do not think that she did the right thing. I think she's essentially grandstanding and just drawing attention to herself, because there is no good reason why she shouldn't have a nanny to look after the child while she works. She's on a salary of probably over £90,000 a year. And I think that also, as we know, maternity cover is available for MPs. So why couldn't she just explore that option should she want to spend more time with her newborn child? MPs can take a 6 maternity leave. That is what she should have done.
Dennis, before I come back to you, I just want to go to Hilary. Hilary, were I a woman, actually, and to write in to you your agony out column and say, look, I want to take my baby into work, what would your advice be?
Well, I think it depends on how old your baby is and what your job is. But as far as I'm concerned, this ruling is stopping women from becoming MPs. So actually, it's putting them off. If you think, well, I'm not going to be able to take my baby in with me, I'm not going to be able to breastfeed, you're not going to become an MP. And we've got a Prime Minister who's proud of the fact that despite his countless children, I'm not even sure he knows how many there are, he's never changed a nappy. He's proud of this. So this is a really backward step, and I think it's a really bad thing. And I think that, children, of course, we're not talking about children who are running around screaming. We're talking about very young babies who need to breastfeed and need to be with their mothers. And one thing women are very good at is multitasking.
So, Dennis, then coming back to you, given what Alice has said there, Alice one day wants to be a mother. So she's saying, look, I don't expect to be able to take my baby with me everywhere I go.
Well, we're talking about the House of Commons, and if I may say so, Dan, I mean it affectionately, surely the biggest baby in global politics we have anywhere in the world sits on the front bench of the current government. I mean, every time I see Boris, I see a giant nappy around him. Maybe he knows how to change it himself, so he doesn't need any extra help. But this is Stella Creasy, once or twice. Her children now, little children, they're too old. She doesn't take them in. When she's there for a debate where she has got something important to say on behalf of her cause, her constituents, whatever, she tucks it into the, into a little sort of thing on the front of her body. Nobody sees it, and up she does and starts speaking. I rushed into the chamber to make a point about George Osborne, and I didn't have a tie on. And I went in there and I was sort of holding up the order paper like this so nobody could see me, because you're not meant to be in there without a tie. How ridiculous is that? And George started shouting, he's not wearing a tie, he's not wearing a tie, Mr. Speaker, throw him out, throw him out. This is how the Tories treat Commons, as just an extension of public schoolboy fun and games. And Stella, as I say, not now, but at some stage, Alice, good luck to your journalist career. Good luck if you think that everybody can have a nanny. My goodness, I wish my two daughters and for their grandchildren could
on the salary that MPs are on, it is simply ludicrous.
No, that salary is not quite right, plus the expenses. But Alice, trust me, become an MP. You're incredibly talented. You'll be very good, and you'll find that just very rare at times.
Dennis, let's let Alice come back to that.
You've got to take the baby in with you.
Let's let Alice come back on that.
Thank you, Dennis. When I become an MP, indeed, I'll find a way to balance my home life and my work life as every single other working mother has to do, whether they're in retail, working in cafes. If they are able to do it, why can't Stella Creasy just obey the law and simply understand that Houses of Commons are not a place for a newborn child. That is very clear to understand. You made comments about Boris looking like a nappy or something. That is not what we're debating here. What we're debating here is very simple. It's about whether the Houses of Commons are a place where mothers should bring their newborn children. Listen, I'm pro-life. I love children, and as I said, I'm very looking forward to hopefully one day having my own family. Can I see that the Houses of Commons are a place where you should just bring your newborn child? No. I'm sorry, Stella's very lucky that her child is quite quiet and sleeping quietly, but that is not the case for most children, in fact. And as we know that our House of Commons are already places of pantomime and screaming adults, I don't think we can add to that screaming babies too.
Hilary, is it not the case that Parliament is already full of screaming children?
Well, yes, indeed, and actually, maybe if there was some women, more women in there, it would actually calm them down a little bit. But the thing is that when you have a young baby, and I've had a child, and I had a young child. I took her to a public lecture. She was 5 months old. My father was giving a lecture. I didn't want to miss it. There was no one who could care for her. I was breastfeeding. She slept all the way through. She was good as gold, no trouble at all. It's perfectly feasible to do that. And when you're an MP, you can't just take maternity leave, because you're representing your constituency and you're personally doing that. It's not like another job where in retail someone can deputise for you for 6 months or a year, whatever. You are the person they've represented, so you have to be there.
Dennis, has Alice not got a point there where Alice has been talking about the fact that there are mothers who are earning a lot less than, and I think you and I would agree, Dennis, that there's a real problem with the affordability of childcare in this country. It's a real deterrent that is prohibiting rearing a child for a lot of people in this country. But do you think Alice has got a point there in what she says about there will be many working women who simply cannot take their child into work, and nor would they demand for their child to be accepted in a workplace? Is this not Stella Creasy making something about Stella Creasy?
Hang on a second. Stella, as I recall, took the little thing in. You could hardly see it on her. So she spoke up. And don't forget, Commons debates aren't preordained. It's not like going to a 9-to-5 job. You know exactly what you'll be doing each hour of the day. When the debate happens and it's something important to you, you've just got to be there. You drop everything. You can't dump the baby kind of in a little bin outside because old Tory men don't like it. And that, I think, is just a very bad signal sending around the world. We've got a baby shortage in this country. Our population is going down, not going up. And saying to women at any level, your babies aren't working. By the way, Alice, there's no law that bans babies. I'm sure Darren or any of the very good friends of GBNews, if they wanted to, could bring in a baby if it was necessary. So I just say, you know, it's the Tory MPs who have made this into a Stella Creasy story. If she'd just been in there with the baby, making her speech, leaving it, I mean, a lot of MPs sleep through debates anyway, and it wouldn't have been a fuss, but they created this artificial little thunderstorm around her. And I just looked at the age of the men on this procedure committee, and my heart sunk. It's over now, it won't happen. Not a good day for Parliament and a very bad day for women.
Alice, do you think, and there has been some controversy in the past, hasn't there, about breastfeeding in public? What's your view?
I think breastfeeding is something that's very natural, and I think, indeed, the kind of outrage over a mother breastfeeding her child would be very misplaced and very wrong. That is something which I obviously feel strongly about, and yet I can still understand that the House of Commons is not a place for a newborn child. Wouldn't it be unfair on a baby anyway to be in this noisy building where adults are debating over law when, you know, perhaps it should be sleeping or taking a walk in a pram? You know, this is kind of a ridiculous debate, to be honest, and there are more important things, I think, that we should be focusing on, of course. But where I stand on this is very clear that the House of Commons are not a place for newborn babies.
Hilary, is it not already the case that, and if not, I imagine you'll be getting some female MPs will be writing into your column saying, well, hang on a minute, I think we need childcare in Parliament. Isn't there already childcare in the House of Commons?
Yeah, I think that there is a crash, I believe. But when you've got a very young baby, you're feeding it, you don't want to leave it in a creche with strangers. I remember when my daughter was born, I didn't want to let her out of my sight for the first few months. You know, you can't just dump your baby somewhere. And I think the other point that's important here is about the cost of childcare, and it is a huge issue, and it's a huge issue for the economy as well, because women cannot afford to work and have children anymore. Childcare, you know, is costing an entire salary. So perhaps if there were more women with young children in the House of Commons, this would become more of an issue, and this would actually help a lot of other areas as well.
Well, Dennis, one MP that recently did have a child, the Attorney General, left on maternity leave and came back. Now, she's not with her newborn every waking hour. There's no suggestion that she's a bad mother. She's just got a very, very high-profile, demanding job, which doesn't allow for an infant to accompany her on the front bench of the House of Commons. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
Nothing at all, and I can't Google it up instantly, but I'll bet you the Ministry of Justice, where she'll work, is got a very, very good creche system. I hope so. There is a creche at the House of Commons for all the staff, not just MPs. There's a little changing room quite close to the chamber, but this is talking about going in for a short period to make a specific intervention and having, like so many women do all over the world, getting on with their work with the baby just wrapped up in a sort of little swaddling cloth on her. And it's been turned into a huge brouhaha by the usual right-wing suspects, the pompous defenders of a pompous old boys-only club Parliament, Commons, and they made themselves look stupid again. I when there's a different majority, if you like, this silly decision can be reversed. And it's a good signal, I think. And I can tell you, babies sleep through the worst shouting and noise. In fact, with my 4 children, whenever I couldn't get them to sleep, I used to put replays of Prime Minister's questions on, and they were out like a light.
Well, I dare say that's true. We'll have to leave it there, though, folks. Thank you very much for each of your contributions. That was the political commentator Alice Grant, former Minister for Europe Dennis McShane, and agony aunt Hilary Freeman. Thank you to each of those. Now, there's plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we'll be asking whether the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, is really fit to be our king. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery across northern and eastern parts, but drier further south and west. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and here it'll be a fine end to the day, with the daytime showers having long died out. There'll be plenty of warm evening sunshine too. Meanwhile, in the southeast, there'll still be a few showers as we head through the evening. Some could be on the heavy side as well. Meanwhile, over in Wales, most of the showers will have cleared away. 1 or 2 are still possible, but for many it will be dry and often sunny. Some showers are set to linger across parts of northwest England and the West Midlands through until the start of the night. The breeze will be picking up too, especially towards the coast. Over in the northeast, we can expect a few heavy showers to end the day. The odd rumble of thunder cannot be ruled out either, though there should be some evening sunshine here as well. Across Scotland, it will turn increasingly windy as heavy, showery rain feeds in from the northwest. Heavier bursts could bring 5 to 10 millimetres of rain in some places overnight. In Northern Ireland, any sunny breaks will be quite limited, and there'll be a few showers through the evening and overnight as well. It's also going to turn blustery here. Heavy and blustery showery rain will then feed across northern parts overnight, staying drier further south with some clear skies. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Now, folks, the Prince of Wales, next in line to the throne, of course. He took more than 20 private flights, including several helicopters, within the UK the last year in order to avoid being stuck in traffic. It's emerged this week. This is the same Prince, of course, who just last year told COP26 that we need to be on a warlike footing to fight the so-called climate crisis and called on working people to cut back. Charles is also under fire for giving an honour to a controversial Tory peer who spent £1.7 million bailing out one of his failed eco-villages in a string of secretive deals being investigated by the charity watchdog. So I'm asking you, is he really fit to be king? Well, with me now to discuss is royal journalist and author Robert Jobson. Robert, thank you very much for your company. Now, does Prince Charles avoiding transport, public transport and other normal modes of transport, risk making him be seen as out of touch? Can he really argue that we need to be on a warlike footing when he himself isn't?
It's an easy hit, this, to be honest. I mean, what you're going to remember as effectively the quasi-king at the moment, there are all sorts of implications when they're head of state, or in his case, effectively deputy head of state, really is travelling anywhere, and security is one of them. Timing is another. So there are sometimes issues where this is unavoidable. I think it's probably a little cheap to say it was just to avoid traffic. I don't think that is the case. It's mainly to do with security. I mean, I've travelled on the Royal flights, for example, when he's on official business, like quite recently to Rwanda. You fly into a military airport, you fly in there at a specific time. On board the aircraft, there is briefings taking place. The household staff are with him. There's briefings of journalists, and the journalists will be on the plane. So I think it's easy when we look at the figures to sort of criticise, but it's no different to what's going on anywhere else in the UK, in the world, really, with other politicians. We don't get this when they're looking at, say, Air Force One or the Prime Ministers or the jet used by the German Chancellor. We simply don't get the same level of criticism.
And is that criticism because of the fact that the Prince of Wales, in his role as Prince of Wales, as heir to the throne, has given speeches waxed lyrical about the issue of the environment and climate change, and actually people are saying, well, rules for thee and rules for... Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Yeah, there's going to be a level of that because you immediately, the word hypocrite comes out. But I know in recent years, for example, he has stopped taking flights, on say holidays, skiing holidays, and where possible, he has done things remotely. There's no doubt that he's trying to change that. But there are situations where you have to go. You have to go and get to an event, for example, such as the Commonwealth Summit, where he is effectively the quasi head of the Commonwealth. He needed to be there, as did all of those other heads of government who all flew in on private jets. Not one of them would have flown in commercially. So I do think there's a level of sort of it's quite simple for those who are critical of the system of monarchy to sling arrows of outrageous fortune at him. But I don't think it's particularly fair. I mean, in my opinion, remember they're now flying in on what is the RAF Voyager, which is a specific plane that is now for the heads of government and for Prince William when he flew to the Caribbean. He doesn't get the same level of criticism, even though of course, he's very much a champion of Earthshot and the environment too. It's just, I think it's to do with popularity. I think it's to do with image.
Hand on heart, though, I say this as a staunch monarchist. I believe in the institution and having a head of state who is removed from politics. Yeah. I think that's a great thing. But the problem is, do we have that confidence, that trust that Prince Charles will be able, once he is the crown, once that crown is on his head, to keep his mouth shut when it comes to political issues and political... You know, we've even heard over recent weeks, it might not be true, but we've even heard over recent weeks the Sunday Times doing hit jobs, but also reporting that he wasn't exactly OK with the Rwanda policy, right? That's taken a political stance.
He may well not have been, and whatever happened there, it leaked out, and there does appear to be a bit of an agenda going on here with, Rupert Murdoch's Times Group. I mean, it was in the Times and that happened. But my feeling on that is just, of course, that is an issue. But, if you're worried about him becoming the king, I don't think we should be, because over the last 5 or 6 or even longer than that years, Prince of Wales has been acting very much in tandem with Her Majesty. As she entered her 90s, she's certainly nowhere near as active, either physically or necessarily mentally, as she would have been, in the previous decades. So the Prince of Wales has very much been acting in that role, supporting the Queen in a very, very strong way. So to the point of, I would say that he's almost doing the job, if not doing the job. And so I think, the Queen hasn't travelled internationally since, I think it's 2016. So, we should accept, really, if we haven't really noticed the difference in the last, decade or so, we should accept that the Prince of Wales is doing a pretty good job. He's doing it, I think, in tandem with the Queen, and obviously in consultation. But he is taking the lead. And I having written a book about him, having worked along and seen him at close quarters over 30 years, I think he's a very able, visionary man who, yes, he has his flaws. A lot of people have flaws, particularly politicians, and it's easy to throw criticism at them. But he has been the leader on big issues that are not party political, the visionary issues to do with sustainability and the environment, when lots of people laughed at him 40 years ago. All I would say is they're not laughing now.
Do you not think it's legitimate for a newspaper like the Sunday Times, though, to actually make the public aware of investigations by charity watchdogs?
Yes, I hear what you say, but on certain stories, I think there's a degree of hysteria. I mean, as we understand, nothing illegal has taken place in any of these situations. I mean, obviously, I'm not party to all the details of what these journalists have been writing about. And of course, I'm the first as a journalist to accept that if there is a legitimate story there where things have been illegal, they have to be exposed. But my understanding so far is that right at the very top of the story, it says nothing illegal here.
I mean, as you say, Jobbo, you've written a book. Do you think Charles is fit to be king, looking back the past 70-odd years of Charles? Or should we skip Charles, as some are suggesting, and go straight to Prince William?
No, I'm not a great believer in anything to do with X Factor monitoring. We can start skipping generations and skipping to the next people. I can understand an argument for that, but you might as well change the system completely. And that is an issue I don't think that many people would want. I think that the Prince of Wales, having watched him and covered, when I wrote the book, Charles at 70 was there with him the whole steps of the way. And, when we look at people criticising him for accepting money, you've got to realise that he has raised probably billions of pounds for much-needed cause. His work with the Prince's Trust has been outstanding in terms of generating businesses from young people that at a time when he started that charity were desperate. They had no real vision. It was his vision that took them to this level. Now, he understands when he is king, when he's actually anointed king, he cannot possibly make party political comments. I don't think he does anyway. I think he makes overall political comments and not partisan comments.
We'll have to leave it there, but that was a robust defence of the future King, Prince Charles, from the royal journalist and author Robert Jobson. I thank you very much for your time. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, we'll be discussing whether or not bringing back grammar schools is a good idea. But now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Coming up to 3:34, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. 6 new allegations of inappropriate behaviour have been made against former Conservative MP Chris Pincher. The fresh claims have emerged just days after he resigned as deputy whip and was suspended from the party after allegedly groping two men. The latest allegations, which stretch back more than a decade, were reported in several newspapers this morning, claiming he made unwanted advances to male MPs. No official complaints were ever made, and he's denied the allegations to newspapers. 6 people have reportedly been killed in Ukraine this afternoon after multiple Russian missile attacks. The mayor of Sloviansk claimed the attacks were the worst shelling to hit the eastern city, causing multiple fires. It's after Russia claims it's taken control of another key city in the east of Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry saying they now control all of the Luhansk region after capturing Lysychansk. Ukraine hasn't yet responded to these claims. Israel say they will analyse the bullet that killed Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh to determine whether one of its soldiers was responsible. She was shot in May while covering an Israeli military raid on a refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. US forensic experts are to oversee the investigation into the ammunition. Eyewitnesses claim she was killed by Israel Defense Forces, something Israel denies. British theatre director Peter Brook has died aged 97. His productions ranged from Lord of the Flies to epic Hindu poem The Mahabharata. He often shunned traditional theatrical buildings for empty spaces such as deserted factories and quarries. Known for staging shows around the world, in 1970 he moved to Paris and founded the International Centre of Theatre Research. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere because Darren will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
The time is 3:38 and you're with Real Britain on GB News. We hear a lot, don't we, folks, about human rights and their many supposed virtues. But is it all positive? The Human Rights Act, a British law, a copy and pasted from European law by Tony Blair, has been in the news lately. It's been used to block the deportation of foreign criminals and terrorists, recently, of course, in the case of some of the Rochdale grooming gang leaders, and now to render the Priti Patel's Rwanda migrant policy almost completely unworkable. So the UK government have said enough is enough, and they've published legislation which will abolish the Human Rights Act and introduce a new British Bill of Rights. So what has human rights law done for us, and is it a friend or a foe? Well, joining me to discuss is the Director of Freedom Law, Luke Gitos. Luke, thank you very much for your time. Can you give my viewers some examples of where the Human Rights Act has, in your view, actually harmed our freedoms, not enhanced them?
Well, I think there's a simple answer to that, and that's if you look at the statute law, i.e. the law made by Parliament that has emerged since the passage of the Human Rights Act in 1998, we have seen some of the most draconian anti-freedom laws in that period. Think about the Reaper Act, the act that was passed in 2000 and made it possible for many more branches of the state to basically spy on citizens, some of the most draconian surveillance powers ever passed. All the anti-free speech laws that we've seen have emerged since then, thinking about the Malicious Communications Act. We've seen increases in speech prosecutions since the passage of the Human Rights Act. So the real question is, what has it done for our freedom? But the second point, and I think the Rwanda example is absolutely central here, because that really showed how undemocratic these laws are. And I think, as someone who thinks of himself as on the left, I'm concerned about democracy, and I'm concerned that political issues are resolved by democratic processes as much as possible. Now, I don't agree with the Rwanda policy, and we can debate the merits of it, but the fact that a single judge who we know nothing about, who we did not elect, and who sits in a court in Strasbourg, was effectively able to stop the execution of a democratically mandated government policy, I think should be extremely worrying to anyone who believes that we should be governed democratically. So, and that by no means the Rwanda policy is not the first example of a non-democratic intervention into our lives from this court, thinking about prisoners' voting rights, for example, where the Tory government tried to prevent prisoners from being able to vote. The European Court intervened there as well. And the examples keep stacking up. So if you are a Democrat, then you should reject these laws, because they pass significant power to the judiciary, both in this country actually and abroad, to resolve important political questions. I'm a lawyer, I trust the rule of law, I believe in the rule of law, but I think some things have to be resolved through politics, and human rights law gets in the way of that.
I completely agree, Luke, but some might be saying, and they might well be allies of yours on the left, they might well be listening to what you're saying right now and saying, look, I cannot imagine why you would want to scrap the Human Rights Act and allow a Tory government to ride roughshod and return you to some kind of fascism or something along those lines. This is the hyperbole that we hear in relation to the Human Rights Act. Do you accept those arguments?
I agree there's a lot of hyperbole like that around. In fact, most of the grief I get about my writing is about what I've said about the Human Rights Act, which is extraordinary. But of course, it ignores the fact that all of our most significant freedoms, the right to a fair trial, the abolition of slavery, the abolition of the death penalty, obviously all of these things precede the passage of the Human Rights Act by many decades. And they are enshrined in our English common law. So when judges in this country make a decision, those decisions bind future courts. And that's how freedom was granted in this country for a very long time before the Human Rights Act passed. So the idea that we would slip back into totalitarianism is completely bonkers. And I also say to people who make that argument, well, if we did have a totalitarian dictator in this country, I can tell you for sure that they would not be held back by the Human Rights Act. It has no power to stop Parliament passing law. It has no power to affect directly the decisions that a government take. So if you're worried about us slipping towards totalitarianism, the Human Rights Act is not going to help. And also, you must remember that almost all the significant freedoms that we've fought for across centuries have been achieved through politics, through democratic pressure. You know, all of them have been won through popular movements, not through judges in Strasbourg.
Luke, and this is where you and I are as one. I completely agree with you. But what I do want to know from you is where you think this disdain for the views of voters for the ballot box. We saw this I think, in the vote for Brexit. I've no idea if you will remain or leave. But in the vote for Brexit, we saw this where many people, figures on the left, seem to me to have lost that desire to make the case electorally and instead want to see it handed to unelected bureaucracies or courts, right? They want to see that removed from the people and handed elsewhere. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree. And in fact, human rights law has always been about encouraging technocratic government. Tony Blair was a big believer in this. And the passage of the Human Rights Act was part of a broader electoral program, which enhanced the role of the judiciary because it was imagined that they knew best. You know, they knew better than the populace. They knew better what was good for us. And I think a repeal of the Human Rights Act, although it would be a limited step, it would be a step in the right direction towards returning more power to resolve important political questions to the people. I was a Leave voter. And I experienced the same opprobrium that many of us did on that side of the argument.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth making the point that the European Convention on Human Rights is separate to the EU.
Yes, exactly.
But politically, it's not that separate because that they do arise out of the same historical moment. They are politically aligned, and they are part of a European project which wants to govern technocratically. And although they are formally separate, you shouldn't historically distinguish them.
And Luke, I think that's the point that has to be made time and again. But that was the Director of Freedom Law there, Luke Giddos, with his thoughts on the British Bill of Rights. Now, moving on, folks, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has hinted that the government is actually set to lift the ban on opening new grammar schools. He said, we're going back to Tony Blair, aren't we again? He said he's not opposed to them in principle, and competition in schools leads to excellent. Another desperate attempt to shore up support in the red and blue wall seats, or a long overdue policy move? Well, joining me now is the teacher and commentator Kevin Rooney and former grammar school girl herself, Anne Widdecombe. Now, Anne, as an ex-grammar school girl, I want to quote to you Maggie Thatcher, and I can do it verbatim, I think, just about. She said, look, I needed grammar schools, Anne, to compete with those from privileged homes like Shirley Williams and Anthony Wedgwood Benn. Does that still ring true with you, Anne?
It rings very true with me, but when you say that Boris is about to lift the ban on grammar schools, a couple of weeks ago they said the exact opposite. So I'm not exactly getting excited about this. But I think what's much more important, by the way, my grammar school was a grammar school for Catholics who passed the 11 plus, and a fee-paying school for people like me who had to pass an entrance exam instead because we weren't Catholics. I just want to make that very clear. It was a mixture. But what I do think is important is my own direct experience when I was an MP in Kent, where there was still a full 11 plus and grammar school system. And every time the then Labour government tried to trigger a ballot to get rid of grammar schools, they failed miserably because the populace there wanted grammar schools. And when I went into grammar schools there, I used to talk to pupils who'd come from very deprived backgrounds who were making it because they were having an academic education that was specifically tailored to their intelligence. And that is what I think is so important. And finally, this. When we had grammar schools in every town, we didn't have complaints that state school pupils couldn't get into Oxbridge.
Kevin, do you agree with those remarks? Are we actually in saying, well, actually, selective education is discriminatory and wrong? Are we actually holding back a generation of kids?
Darren, do you know what? I wouldn't fetishise the grammar school issue one way or the other. So I'm for parental demand. And if there's a demand for grammar from parents like there is in some parts of England, close to me, you've got Hertfordshire and Kent, where parents are wanting grammar schools and they have them, good luck to them. So I'm all for parental choice, but I would say grammar schools are not a silver bullet that's going to solve all our problems. And I think this is where the left and the right become a little bit irrational. I think that the left have an irrational hatred of grammar schools And I think that the right and the Conservative Party have an irrational love of them, thinking it's going to solve all the problems. And the $6 million question is this, Darren, why can't we have first-class schools for all?
Yeah, well, Kevin, I agree with that. But what would you like to see in education then? Do you support free schools, for example?
I'm all for experimentation, so I'm for free schools. I'm for religious schools. I'm for grammar schools if people want them. I think, to be honest with you, Darren, in the ideal world, I quite like the idea of the comprehensive ideal. But I accept completely that the dream of comprehensive education hasn't always been successful, and there's been major problems. So I wouldn't want to, run away from that conversation. So I'm up for the debate about how we can have the best education system possible. But I remain to be convinced, Darren, that grammar schools are the answer, because there's a couple of really classic arguments here. I mean, effectively what you have with year 6 in primary school is it's the rich parents who get to tutor their kids, who've got lots of money, who prep them for the test, are often the people that get into the grammar school in the first place. So even though there was an argument in the past, maybe in the 1970s and 60s, where certain working class kids who were very bright were fortunate and they had the escape valve of a grammar school to get to, I accept that. And those kids were lucky enough to escape and climb up the ladder.
Yeah.
I do think it's like snakes and ladders. It swings and roundabouts. There's arguments both ways there, Darren.
OK, and that argument is made, though, isn't it, where the tutoring argument, that argument's made in relation to the abolition of private schools as well, where people say, well, you could just say to your rich parents could say to tutors, I want you to ensure that my child gets into the best possible state school, and you can game the system no matter what way, right? So this form of selective education, life is unfair sometimes, Anne. Isn't that just what we've got to remember?
Well, life is unfair, and the one thing I did agree with that my opponent said was that there is no single silver bullet. There is no single silver bullet to solve this, and we do need to spend a great deal of time, in my view, and resource and determination on trying to get some of those ghastly, failing inner city comprehensives up to scratch so that children can actually benefit from that sort of education. But I would say this about tutoring. I think that very much used to be the case. But increasingly now, education authorities are designing papers that test intelligence and reasoning. And you can't actually be taught intelligence. You can be taught expected answers, but you can't always be taught how to work things out. So I think there are answers to that. But also, I mean, you're right. Life is a bit unfair. And certainly in Kent, there was a pattern where the wealthier parents sent their children to prep schools in order to get them to pass the 11 plus to get into grammar schools. But then that raises the question, why is it that the prep schools can do what the primaries can't? Why?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, if I were a parent, I would do everything to ensure that my child had the very best education. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But where we are agreed, all of us, I think, would be that levelling up is nothing without improving our schools. But that we'll have to end it there, unfortunately. That was the teacher and commentator Kevin Rooney and the former Brexit Party MEP and grammar school girl, as I said there, Anne Widdecombe. Now, folks, another difficult week for Heathrow and holidaymakers. This time, fueling systems went into meltdown and planes were stranded. Shortages of staff to handle baggage and carry out these security checks were causing long queues and delays at many airports across the country. Now, to solve this issue, the government has ordered vetting centres to fast-track checks for new recruits to try and help plug those gaps. But will this help, and how at risk are your summer plans? Well, joining me now for the latest update is travel editor at The Sun, Lisa Minow. Lisa, hello. So are airlines expected to cancel flights to minimise these disruptions? What would you actually say to viewers who are... they might well be packing their bags imminently, who are saying, oh my God, is my flight about to be cancelled?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand their worries because this is going to be quite impactful on anyone who's booked to go out of Heathrow. Now, Gatwick has already announced that there's going to be a reduction in the number of flights they will allow going out of their airport over July and August. EasyJet is the largest airline at that airport, so that's going to impact EasyJet the most. They announced that a couple of weeks ago, and hopefully those flights have already been cancelled. Now this week we've had Heathrow saying the same thing. They want airlines to cancel flights so that they can ensure that the actual airport experience doesn't collapse and fall into chaos like we've seen in recent weeks. Now, they've told airlines they have until Friday to inform customers exactly which flights are going to be cancelled. There's also a slot amnesty, which I think will help airlines. At the moment, if an airline wants to keep their very, very valuable slots at Heathrow, they have to run a minimum number of planes, and that's about 70% at the moment. Now, right now, we don't have the staff in the airports or at the airlines for some airlines to actually run those 70% of their planes. So they're actually forced to run services when they know that they actually don't have the crews for them. So this is a good move. So the slot amnesty means that they no longer have to take 70% of their slots all the time. Other airlines can perhaps jump in, other airlines who are perhaps better suited, better staffed up. So that should be a good move. It's whether or not, though, all of these various different moves will have the impact that's desired to save us from another summer like we saw, the disaster we saw in half term.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, a lot of people are saying, and I've been reading reports from America, which last time I checked wasn't a member of the European Union, past or present, but a lot of people have been saying, oh, well, this is Brexit, right? It's Brexit Britain that's having these issues exclusively. But that's just not true, is it?
No, I mean, I think you find that there has been staffing shortages across Europe and beyond. Of course, as you say, lots of flights cancelled in America today, and they've got real issues with staffing at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. There is problems with Lufthansa. They've had to cancel many flights, and we've got strike action across Europe in terms of Ryanair and EasyJet staff in France, Spain, Portugal, and the UK. We've had, voting for strike action here as well. So this is something that is affecting the whole global aviation industry. But you can understand why. This was the main industry that was completely devastated by the pandemic. From lockdowns to then this stop-start, traffic light systems, travel corridors, and then for all of a sudden, all of those restrictions to be dropped, and that huge demand that they should have anticipated, if I'm honest. People were desperate to travel again. We're an island. We like to get away and we like to come back to our lovely little island, but we like to travel. So you can understand why. It's just the fact that it needs to be sorted quickly.
Lisa, perfect advice. Thank you very much for your time. That was The Sun's travel editor, Lisa Minnow there. Now, folks, you have been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much for your company. This is on every Saturday and Sunday at 2 o'clock. But for now, folks, I'm going to leave yous with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery across northern and eastern parts, but drier further south and west. Here are the details. Starting off in the southwest, and here it'll be a fine end to the day, with the daytime showers having long died out. There'll be plenty of warm evening sunshine too. Meanwhile, in the southeast, there'll still be a few showers as we head through the evening. Some could be on the heavy side as well. Meanwhile, over in Wales, most of the showers will have cleared away. One or two are still possible, but for many it will be dry and often sunny. Some showers are set to linger across parts of northwest England and the West Midlands through until the start of the night. The breeze will be picking up too, especially towards the coast. Over in the northeast, we can expect a few heavy showers to end the day. The odd rumble of thunder cannot be ruled out either, though there should be some evening sunshine here as well. Across Scotland, it will turn increasingly windy as heavy, showery rain feeds in from the northwest. Heavier bursts could bring 5 to 10 millimetres of rain in some places overnight. In Northern Ireland, any sunny breaks will be quite limited, and there'll be a few showers through the evening and overnight as well. It's also going to turn blustery here. Heavy and blustery showery rain will then feed across northern parts overnight, staying drier further south with some clear skies. And that's how the weather is shaping